Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. Today we're going to talk about multiple level deck construction. All right, because that's exactly what we're doing, and there's a few different ways to do it, and we have multiple different techniques that we're using on this particular project. So I thought we'd go over some of those and maybe give you guys some ideas on what's the deciding factor on levels and so on and so forth. Now this deck is massive. It's, close to, I think it's almost 2,000 square feet. There's lots of room to change elevations. There's one thing you got to consider when you're rebuilding or building new or replacing a deck, and that is the floor elevation inside the house. The floor elevations inside the house sometimes will dictate how many levels you have to have on a deck, right? So in this house, there's multiple level changes inside the home. There's the kitchen area, there's a sunken living room, and then there's sunken bedrooms lower than that. So our particular build, we have to build to certain door thresholds around the areas of the house. So that's why this deck has 4 different levels. One is not crucial to any particular part, but it's going to be the main feature of this deck, and it's going to have the most detail and the most work involved in creating it. So what I'm going to do is start up here with the uppermost level, and then we'll just go by level and I'll explain to you the differences. So this first level is new post and beam construction. So you'll see that we have new footings, new posts, new beam, and new joists. So everything on this side of the deck has been new. And then it comes around to another beam where the deck comes out, and then there's going to be a staircase that comes off of this double aluminum rim joist right here and comes down onto the concrete. So now we have a glue lam. Now we used a glue lam because a normal beam won't span 15 feet from post to the other side of the deck. So we added an engineered beam instead, so we didn't have to put any posts down the middle, which is actually uneven terrain. It's kind of difficult to navigate, and it would have been a really tall post in a really odd spot. So I opted not to use a post in the middle, and we actually mounted the far side of the beam we integrated it into the next deck, lower deck. Now, I have to explain something to you. The levels inside this house, they're very tall, they're very steep. So I was measuring from deck to deck on our frame, from threshold to threshold on different parts of the house, and I kept coming up with this 23.5-inch variance. And I'm like, man, that's almost 8 inches per rise, which in my opinion is a little tall. So I asked the client if I could go inside the house and measure the rises inside the house, and I'll be darned if they weren't 7 3/4 to 7 7/8 elevation between the floor and the step and the stair rises, and then into a hallway. So everything had a tall rise. So with that information, I said, normally I don't give you high rise steps, but in this instance, I think we're gonna have to maybe do something a little different where we're actually giving you the same height rise as you have inside the house. And they were cool with that because they're used to it. So, and they're used to their old deck with the same rise situation that we have, that I'm running into now. So we're going to make all the rises a little taller, and the stairs are gonna be a little bit steeper than normal, but it's gonna be what the client's used to, so it's okay. All right, with that being said, so the first level I've explained. Now the second level, we have existing posts. Now the reason we're using these existing posts is because these posts are pressure treated piles that were driven really deep into the ground originally when they built the house 45 years ago. The piles are still in good shape, or these posts, these round posts, are like 14 inches diameter, okay? So if you measure across the post, it's about a 14-inch width. One of them was a little soft, but what we're doing is we're negating any more moisture that's gonna be going into these areas, so it'll never go any worse. So we treated the top of the post, and then we were able to put a little protective layer on top of that, and then we're kind of waterproofing over the tops of all the beams so that no more water can get to that area and affect it anymore in the future. So that's what we did right here. We kept the posts, but the beam was trashed. We put in a new glue lam over here. with some new brackets. Okay, so that's sitting good. And then let's go down. I want to show you what we're doing down here. All right, so over here, we have several beams coming into this one post. I'm just grateful that these are still in decent shape so we could reuse them, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different beams coming in and converging kind of on the weight of all of this one pile. But these piles are driven very deep into the ground. They were driven with the house piles. So when they drove all these for the house, they also drove the ones for the deck. The clients wanted to keep these piles because it matched the rest of the house and they were still in good shape. The problem was they were exposed to the elements. So to keep them from getting any future deterioration, we installed a bladder system over the top of all the beams. So any moisture that comes down has to shed across and drop so that the beams will never see wet or a wet environment again. And so this particular side of the deck has existing posts with existing beams, and that way we didn't have to disassemble half the house to install new ones. Now this section here behind me, we had existing beam that was tied to another existing beam with a custom bracket. The beam was in good shape, but we needed to elevate, and we had to add below as well so that we could add a ledger to a special section of the deck. The way the deck was framed before was much different than the way we framed it now. And we got rid of some of the bulk because it had a lot of old hot tub beams and extra materials right and left and back and forth, and it was kind of a mess. So we cleaned it all up, but to do that, we had to attach to the existing beam again so that we could create our elevations that we needed to create these levels in the right spot. So as you come down the deck, there's like a deck, 2 steps, a deck, 2 steps, a deck, 2 steps, and then the bottom deck. So that's your 4 levels. So in between the 4 levels, there's 3 rises to get you to the next level. The 3rd rise being the actual deck itself. So there's 2 stairs in between each section of the deck. But over here, we had to add a lower piece and an upper piece to get the separation we needed to create the proper height. So we also, by doing that, we're able to recreate a wall and make a solid area over here and still be able to get the gas where it needs to go and still be able to get the electric to where it needs to go and still be able to attach our ledger the way it needed to be attached so that we could create this level. As you can see, it's multiple layers. So we framed this deck out to be this big so that the crossover point would catch at 6 feet and that we'd still have something to land on below it. But so a lot of this framing that we did isn't really going to be used for decking. It'll never be seen, but we needed it for the structure, for the support that we needed for the next level of the deck, if that makes sense. So there's one section of the deck that's very custom, has a lot of curves. It's going to have a fire pit and benches and tilt back seating and lots of deck board bending. And that's going to be the feature level of this deck. And we're going to go up and look at that in a minute. But first, let me show you this last section over here. Okay, so this is the largest section of the deck. This is I'd say 16 by 32 or so, 16 by 32, but then it also has a 6-foot radius. So there's like a 12-foot by 6-foot section on a curve that's pushed out to the edge of it as well. And that's the section you just saw over there. So here, we use the existing posts, and then we put in a brand new glulam beam. We seamed it over the center. So these are like 16-foot glulams, and they're 14 inches. I think they're 14 inches thick. So 6 by 14. And then we, again, waterproof the tops of all these beams so that water, even though it's a pressure-treated beam, I just like, you know what, we're gonna do all of them. We're gonna do all the beams the same. And then over here, we connected to the house, which is basically on the same type of structure. It's a 14-inch wide post, circular, and then it has 8 by 12s for beams. I think they're 12s. Those look a little bigger. These might be 8 by 14s. 8 by 13 and a half, yeah, 8 by 14. And then our ledger and our joists and everything are attached to the house. And we had to go in and clean up the house and make sure all the blocking was tight so that we had something solid to attach to. because all these joists used to cantilever through the house, and that's no longer an acceptable method. You just can't screw to the cut ends of those. You have to screw to the side blocks, but the blocking, you have to make sure, you have to be responsible and make sure that you can attach to it. This section, basically, everything's new except for the posts, and those went in relatively well. The one thing about piles, when they're driving piles, they go right and left. You can't always get them exactly where you want them. So this particular deck, the beam is a foot out of square from the house. It's askew. So the far end, I think, sticks out. So one side has a foot more cantilever than the other side because the beam just isn't parallel with the house, because that's how the piles went in. It is what it is. We had to go with that since we're reusing the piles. All the beams are out of square. So far, it hasn't been a problem. Everything's gone in fairly well, and we'll just keep on keeping on with it. So basically, that's the 4th level. And as you know, each level requires a different beam height. So when you're building a deck like this with multi-levels, you really do have to consider how much space do I want to use for each level. If you're building a 10 by 20 and you decide to split it right here, you only got 2 small 10 by 10 decks. It doesn't really make sense to split the level. But when you have multiple levels and lots of room, then it kind of makes sense to create different levels for the deck. So let's just go up and take a look from the top side, and I'll show you kind of what we have going on there. All right, guys, so here's a couple different levels. Oops. Forgive the cinematographer at the moment because it's me. It's a little dangerous for Studio Man to be up here walking around on joist trying to film this, so I'm doing it. There's 3 levels that you can see right now. Actually 4. Here's the bottom one right here, and then here's the middle level, and then there's an upper level, and then the uppermost level is right there. Let's see if we can zoom that in. There's the upper level right there. So that's the 4 different levels, and then there'll be stairs there. And then as you come over here, we're gonna build a set of curved stairs that go from here to here. And then this over here is gonna be a curved bench going all the way around here. And then there's another set of stairs that come down right here. And then over here, there's gonna be another bench that keeps you from coming down off the deck here. So it's like a double bench situation, kind of like grandstands going on over here. And then there's gonna be a fire pit right in the middle of this circle. So that's what you can do with multiple levels of a deck if you have the space. Now this center deck right here, it's not really much for anything except for getting from point A to point B. There's not a lot of area to lounge. We are gonna curve this outside edge. Once we figure out where this deck ends here, okay? Once we figure out where all this deck ends here, then we'll be able to figure out where to end this deck over here, and then continue our curve. So that's kind of the next step. We just have a little bit more blocking to put in place before we continue on. But sometimes making a multiple tiered deck, multiple level deck is really cool if you have the right design and enough elevation and space. But you can see there's a door right there, and then there's doors over here that are this level. So we have to create the spacing so that you can get from these doors up to those doors. And then there's more doors around the corner that are even higher. So there you go. There's your different levels on this particular deck. All right, guys. Well, that concludes this video about multi-level decks. If you have any questions, leave them below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and that bell icon. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.